So, when are gamers actually going to be able to play this all-new upcoming edition of Resident Evil 3? Well, that's the big question, isn't it? Everyone wants to know, when is this all-new upcoming edition of Resident Evil 3 going to hit the store shelves? And as of this recording, it is honestly kind of hard to say. In fact, Capcom has not even confirmed this all-new upcoming edition of Resident Evil 3. However, with that said, we do know that there are multiple titles being worked on right now as of this recording using the RE engine, and that the RE engine is going to be forward compatible with next generation hardware. Now, here's the thing. I think ultimately Resident Evil 8 is going to be next. I think that's a very fair thing to assume as of this recording. You know what I mean? Resident Evil 7 wrapped up production a couple of years ago, and I can only assume that Capcom quickly moved on, starting with Resident Evil 8 right after Resident Evil 7 wrapped up. So if I had to guess what is coming next for the Resident Evil franchise, obviously my pick would be, Resident Evil 8. So where does that really put us in regards to this all-new upcoming edition of Resident Evil 3? Well, again, it's really hard to say. I mean, we don't have any confirmation on this all-new upcoming edition of Resident Evil 3, and as of this recording, as of late, Capcom is looking for, people within the Resident Evil Ambassador program to currently kind of test a game that is in development. Now, they didn't say it was a Resident Evil game specifically, and, some people might say, well, why wouldn't it be a Resident Evil game, Michael? It's kind of within the Resident Evil Ambassador program. Well, sure, that does make kind of a lot of sense, but it may not be a Resident Evil game. But if it is a Resident Evil game, it could very well just be, the upcoming titles that are coming to the Nintendo Switch later this year. I think it's Resident Evil 5 and 6. So maybe they just want to test those games out before they drop them on the Nintendo Switch later this year. Now, here's what I fear. I fear that Resident Evil 8 is going to be that game that sort of makes people kind of forget about this all-new upcoming edition of Resident Evil 3. And the reason why I say that is because when Resident Evil 8 does drop, and maybe it's going to be sooner rather than later, who really knows, people are going to forget about this all-new upcoming edition of Resident Evil 3. I mean, the hype is already deflated. You know what I mean? People aren't talking about it as much. And I just don't know if the game is really... if people are really that kind of in demand for a modern-day treatment of Resident Evil 3. And in fact, I think Capcom might actually do this. They might just kind of create an expansion DLC for this all-new edition of Resident Evil 2. A Resident Evil 3 expansion DLC for this all-new edition of Resident Evil 2. And the reason why I think they could do that, they could pull that off, is because Resident Evil 2 sold like hotcakes. So the install base is already there. So if you have a copy of this all-new edition of Resident Evil 2, you can pick up this 2 to 4 hour kind of expansion, this Resident Evil 3 expansion DLC, and kind of get your fill that way. Maybe that's what they could do. And maybe that could come out shortly after Resident Evil 8. I mean, I know that sounds a little far-fetched right now, but I just don't know. You have to remind yourself that Resident Evil 3 rather, is that game that got swept under the rug. People consider it a spin-off title. It really wasn't meant to be its own thing. People actually look at Code Veronica and say that's a superior Resident Evil title. And if that's how people feel about Resident Evil 3 ultimately, then is there really a need for Capcom to go back in and reimagine this game from the ground up? I just don't know if there is. If the support isn't there, Capcom isn't going to pull the trigger. So we have to continue to push really hard and really strong in these quiet times to remind Capcom that, hey, yes, this is something that we are indeed clamoring for. This all-new upcoming edition of Resident Evil 3. You know what I mean? Because again, once that Resident Evil 8 wave comes in, this all-new upcoming edition of Resident Evil 3 is going to be forgotten about. We can't let that happen, folks. Show Capcom your support by hitting that like button